This is actually like
1935, the Lions win the NFL championship. The Detroit Tigers take the World Series. The Red Wings bring home Lord Stanley's Cup. Joe Louis begins his rise to world domination. This transforms the Motor City into Detroit, City of Champions.
Crack of the bat. We are back to it. We're back to baseball.
back to baseball.
And we are talking about the Tigers and the recruiting habits on Detroit City of Champions, the podcast.
Yeah, again, this is like the foundational time of Detroit Tiger, of the entire Detroit Tiger minor league system.
Yeah.
And it's this is an interesting time. This is like we've talked about before, like obviously we're at episode 113.
Yeah.
So it's so just on the concept that it's 113 episodes to talk about 1 year.
Yeah.
This is a foundational epic in Detroit sports history.
Now, here's something I found interesting, because you've talked about how the Red Wings went through several name changes prior to becoming the Red Wings. Were they different teams? Was it full new team, or was it the same team, just a name change?
Yeah.
Okay, but the Lions were the Spartans transplanted here in 34 because of how well the Tigers did in 34. But there were 2 or 3 failed teams before that.
Yeah.
So why were the Tigers able to? Because the Tigers, they had some success prior to 35.
Yeah.
They had some good stuff, but there were some lean years. So how were they able to make it through when the football teams couldn't and folded? How were the Tigers able to make it through? Okay.
The answer to that question is barely.
Okay.
Because they, the early, because you had it. First of all, you had the Detroit Wolverines in the late 1800s that they won a baseball championship.
Okay.
Professional, but it wasn't the World Series. It was 1888, and they had the 1880s baseball. Baseball was massive.
Yeah.
And so the Detroit Wolverines, what you basically had was you basically had a team of like a bunch of mercenaries that were all like that. That's kind of how the 1880s baseball was.
Yeah.
You had basically that's kind of the rise of professional baseball was, that you just had guys who, like, you had all these different cities that they, like, when one city was like kind of coming up in the world, baseball was such a majorly, like, it was such a driving force in the 1880s.
Okay.
That's why I say the 1800s, the late 1800s is my favorite time in American history. They called it the Gilded Age. And when you actually, if you want to read like a fascinating time of just American history in general, but sports and sports as a part of that. The 1880s, late 1800s is just one of the most fascinating eras of baseball. And that's why I say, like, I mean, that's baseball. The way they played in the 1800s, that was baseball. It was like, and the way that they did it was actually somewhat reminiscent of today. You had these mercenaries. You had these guys that would demonstrate their absolute superiority. And then you would have like some city coming up in the world and some guy that was, building a team. He had, for instance, one of the owners, I think it was the St. Louis Browns. The guy that was he was actually the owner of the founder of like what would become the Cardinals. I believe that's who the guy was.
Yeah.
But he basically bought a baseball team so that he could sell beer. Like that was the main thing. Like he owned a bar and
I think
brewery.
that's what they do now.
Yeah, but
I'm pretty much that's.
But it was like the other
sure
way. But it was like they didn't just sell beer at the games. It was like he bought a team so that he could sell beer to the fans. Like that was the whole thing.
Right.
Because he's like, why have a little bar? And then when I can have a big bar and have like live entertainment of a baseball game, like 100 games a year or whatever. That was like that. I mean, that was his mentality. But he's like, well, they're not going to.
That guy's a genius.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. When you read about his story, it's amazing because he's like, but I can't just have a crappy team. I got to have a team that everybody loves. So he'd go out there and buy all the best players that you could possibly get your hands on.
What beer was it?
I think that he was the forerunner of that's what I'm saying. It was the Cardinals, because I think it might not have been Augustus Busch, but it was like somebody that was associated. I forget his name all the time. It's like that's my eternal shame that I forget his name.
Adolf?
No, it wasn't that. But you know what? It might have been actually. Now you
Coors.
mention it.
Coors. It was Adolf Coors.
It wasn't Coors. It was something else. But he was a guy that was
and
sort
his
of
story.
associated
That
with
story is just messed up.
Yeah, but it was
Adolf Coors and his story is jacked.
But I'm pretty sure that he was the founder of the Browns, and then it, in a weird way, it like morphed into the Cardinals, and then they started a Browns team across the way. Some story like that. I forget. All
right, we'll have to get.
But
we'll have to get a 6-pack of that beer.
Yeah.
From 1880.
Yeah.
And it'll be tasty.
Yeah. So, but
we'll talk about that too.
So to answer, to kind of go back to your question, is Detroit kind of did that. They basically bought a bunch. You know, they brought in a bunch of guys who were
we had
studs.
some stellar players back in the day.
But the 1880s, they built like a super team.
Yeah.
And then they won that world championship. They went across the country playing all these teams, all these different games. And then they won the championship that year, the 1880s. And then that team, like 2 years later, some other team came along, was like, hey, we want all these guys. And so they went and played for another team. So, and then the Wolverines just became crap, and then they folded. And so they lost their team. So for the Tigers, you had the National League, which that was the Wolverines were in that. That's what they won.
Okay.
And then there was this huge, just an incredible amount of flux in the National Leagues, all these different cities that were coming and going. And Detroit was one of them. And then you had, at one point you had a competition running against. They're like, well, because what happened was the National League, they started to sort of crystallize into this dominant power, and there was like a certain rigid cities that were there. It was like New York, Chicago, Boston, like all the sort of main Eastern cities. But then you had Ban Johnson come along, and he was like, he had a AAA team. He had a AAA league that he owned, and so he was like grabbing all these cities that the National League wouldn't let into their system.
Okay.
And then he started adding teams in the cities that the National League was already in to
like
compete directly.
Red Sox, White Sox,
kind of like the NFL,
kind of
like the NFL, how they had the NFL
two teams in a city
started because there's all the NFL wouldn't let anybody in, and so they created the AFL.
Screw you guys.
Yeah, we're starting our own league. Yeah, and so then they started going to war with the National League and bringing all these players into what they called the American League.
Yeah,
and then the World Series, because the American League got so good, because they were literally taking players from the National League, and they had teams in Chicago and New York and all this. It was 1901 when they founded the American League. And then you actually had the American League challenge the National League and say, we want a World Series, just like the NFL, where the AFC challenged, the AFL challenged the NFL. And then the first Super Bowl was really a battle between two different leagues.
Okay.
You know, I mean, that was really the whole thing. And so the same thing with the American and National League, where they challenge each other. And that was what, and that was like, these are legit two teams going against you. Let's build a bigger league, let's form together. So you had American League, National League. And then, but then you had like one year's, and I think it was 1905, that John McGraw, who was the New York Giants manager for the National League, and he like wouldn't even play the American League. He's like, they're inferior to us. And so they were like, you win. It was like one of the worst he's still talked about to this day that was like the only World Series that was never played.
Yeah.
Because he was like, we're not even going to play them. They're too weak compared to us. We're so good. And then, but nobody accepted that. They're like, dude, you wimped out on a game that everybody wanted to see.
Yeah.
So anyways, as far as how the Tigers stuck with it was, in short, you had a major talent discovery in the early 1900s, which was Ty Cobb,
right,
who became very quickly, the best player in all of baseball.
Yeah,
certainly the most fascinating player in all of baseball.
Yeah.
And the stories of Cobb are still told to this day. And so for the Tigers, they had this new superstar young talent who came into I believe it was 1905 when he joined the Tigers, and just immediately was like one of the greatest players in the game, one of the most interesting, fascinating, dynamic, players who's ever played baseball. And he was on the Detroit team. And so they went to 3 straight World Series, 1907, 1908, 1909.
Yeah.
They lost to the Chicago Cubs the first 2, and then to the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1909. Yeah. And then but the rest of the time, the Tigers were still competitive, even though they didn't go to another World Series again, not until 1934. But they were still interesting. And the Cobb was with the Tigers till 1926. Cobb, he was there for the next 21 years. And so that's a pretty long gap to bridge. You're talking about how did they survive? Well, they had Cobb. They had the most fascinating player in the game.
There you go. Yeah. So as long as you're filling seats. Yeah.
And that's what I mean.
So they weren't winning the championships,
No,
but they were an interesting team.
Absolutely. And
All
so,
right.
and even when they weren't going to the World Series, they always had like great hitting with Cobb, and they always had other, they had all these Harry Heilman, and they always had great hitters. There was always their pitching that was terrible. And so then even when Cobb left in 26, like they discovered another superstar in Charlie Gehringer out of nowhere. The guy was super young, and all of a sudden, so he was kind of like the heir to Ty Cobb. And you actually had George Moriarty, who we talked about, one of my favorite guys. And Moriarty became the manager of the team for a couple of years with Charlie Gehringer, as their new star. And so they had a marketable manager in Moriarty, who was a fan favorite, and then you had Gehringer as one of the superstars. So for several years, so that that takes you all the way through. That's like 1928.
They get through that hump of
between Cobb, but
challenging years. Okay.
But the thing is, that takes you to about 1928. And from that point, however, that's when the Tigers started to deteriorate,
because
they were awful.
That was part of the story. There was like the owner was like, "Well, I might just pull the plug on it."
The attendance in 1933 was, and again,
abysmal.
When the Great Depression hit. You had, the Tigers had already been terrible. They had Gehringer, but Gehringer was very, he had virtually no personality. They called him the mechanical man because he was very quiet, but he was an elite player, but there's no flash. There was no, he didn't have the sort of swagger of a Cobb or anything like this. He was just an automatic, like machine, like workman star, where he was just consistently excellent every single day. And the rest of the guys were crap. He'd have a handful of guys who were decent from year to year, but otherwise they were, very low talent, like second division, like low, always finishing the bottom half of the league every single year. And so, so that's where they were. It's 1933. By 1933, the Tigers had, their attendance in 1933 matched what they had done in 1907 when their ballpark was only seated like 16,000 or something, so that's what I mean. So their attendance was terrible. It was in the middle of the Great Depression. And I said in the book, like fans in the middle of the Great Depression, Detroit's the hardest hit city in the country. Fans had a heck of a lot better ways to spend their time and money than to go watch a bunch of losers on the field who reminded them of their own situation on a daily basis. So that's where you're at. That's why, this is like sort of what we're talking about is, I think pretty important because this is what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. The Ivory Hunters.
Yeah.
So again, I know you explained this. So why are we calling this? Why do you call this the Ivory Hunters?
Well, I call it because that's what they call it in the newspapers when they did their, whenever they talked about these different.
So they were out searching for raw talent.
Yeah, like Ivory.
And they called them Ivory Hunters.
Yeah, like you're hunting elephants.
And that was a common term in the 1800s there for the baseball scouts.
Well, that's what these guys are calling it. So Ivory Hunters, because you're looking for the raw ivory so they can turn it into piano keys and stuff like this.
And little
like
keychains,
whatever it is. They're looking for the raw ivory to send back. So this is like But what's interesting, just one more element of this era, which sort of validates, or this entire show and this entire emphasis on this year and this time period is, again, this is the time. If you are a Detroit sports fan, if you love Detroit sports, this is the era that Detroit sports was born. There's undisputable. Right. There's you can sit there and say, well, Ty Cobb was a huge guy. Yes, Ty Cobb was an important player, but that's not when Detroit sports were born.
No.
That was when the Tigers were born.
No.
That was when this concept, that's when the Tigers were, developed as a legitimate major league organization. But that's not when Detroit sports as a whole was born.
I did not equate Ty Cobb with Detroit baseball.
Oh, big time.
I didn't. Again,
you're not
as a bit of a novice. I didn't.
Yeah.
Well, until we started doing this. And I'm sure there's people like me that are dumb.
Well, no, Cobb,
I'm dumb.
But what I'm saying is that whenever people are talking, this is like, again, sort of back to the to the show as a whole, is whenever people are talking about the history of Detroit sports, Cobb is a central figure in the conversation. But the thing about Cobb is what you usually talk about is you have Ty Cobb.
There's so much more.
You have Ty Cobb, and then it's like it jumps all the way up to It jumps all the way up to like the 68 Tigers. I mean, it just warp speeds ahead. You might see somebody talk about Hal Newhouser, but that was in
and they skip all the 35
Oh,
stuff.
that's completely forgotten.
They skip it.
Every once in a great while in a book, you might see a picture, something of Mickey Cochran, just a rag, photo of him saying, "Oh, Mickey."
And these
was great
guys
whatever,
were so important to the city and so important to
but
why our city is amazing. Yeah.
This is the era in which it all the entire landscape of the way that of Detroit sports as a cultural phenomena in this city. This is the era in which it was born.
Yeah.
You have still to this day, you have all these other cities and all this. Every other city at one point or another has either lost a team or changed the name of a team. I heard somebody the other day, I had this, one time I mentioned this to somebody, they're like, no, what about Chicago? They have never lost a team. I'm like, yeah, they did. They lost to Chicago Cardinals. And they're like, well, yeah, but they still retain the Bears. And that's true. But what I'm saying is you have this. But I'm saying is that the four major teams that were in this city, or the three major teams, the Tigers, Lions, Red Wings, that were in this city, were etched firmly into the cultural fabric of Detroit. They were not just etched, they were woven in. They were carved into the very soul of what is Detroit and what is Detroit sports. This was
at this point, they could not exist.
Yes.
Like right now. They could not just, we're going to close the doors.
But we take it for granted. But we take
your favorite team there in your Expos, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. These teams are not going to leave. These are cultural fabrics, cultural frameworks.
It's the Winnipeg Jets, not so much.
Exactly.
Gone.
Exactly.
Right? So I don't think they could not exist, to use way too many negatives for a English teacher in one sense. But so we're talking to Jack. Is it Jack Zeller?
Jack Zeller, yeah. So
we're talking about the Ivory Hunters. We're talking about these scouts.
So this is what's going on.
What's the time frame?
So we're
talking 1935 is when the City of Champions happened. And when is
Jack?
When's
it's 1935. All these guys are, yeah.
These are Jack's.
All these Ivory Hunters are, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we're talking a little bit about before and after their life story.
I thought we were building,
but it's all 35.
Okay, this is 35. Okay,
every one of these guys had a role in the development of the 1935 Tigers. Absolutely.
Right.
But
we're part 4, and I just went.
We're
on part 4, and I just went, okay.
But they all have different stories as far as their routes for getting here.
But they've been here for a while.
They've all were part of the 35s. Okay. They're behind the scenes. These are the guys that were finding the ivory that formed the 1935 Detroit Tigers World Series championships.
Why it happened. All right.
Yeah. So these are the guys behind the scenes that were doing it. And so they all, some of them started years prior, and some of them stayed with the team for years later.
So we're talking about Jack today.
Yeah. And so it's just to refresh the memory that the way that the Tigers scouting, again, another thing to refresh the memory on is that this is the era, besides this being the formative, foundation of the Tigers and of their entire minor league system. Mm-hmm. This is also the birth of what we call the farm system of today. The way that the farm system is laid out today, that we just accept is just this is how it's always been. It hasn't always been where you have the AAA, AA, single A. It has not always been like that. There was actually a time before that it did not exist. And this is the era in which the beginning of those systems were being built.
Okay.
So this is a formative era for baseball as a whole, as well as, the Tigers. And these are the men who built the Tigers version of that farm system and laid the first foundation for how that farm system would become.
So where do the Savannah Bananas fall into?
They don't fall in. I don't talk about them. No, I don't talk
I know you don't. I know you don't like that.
Trying to trigger me. I'm gonna walk out of here.
Gaslighting you. I'm gaslighting you on the bananas, man.
Just for everybody.
But we're talking about that guy selling beer and filling seats.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's just
the thing about it is, here, I'm gonna go and deviate on this topic just so everybody knows where I stand on this. Because if people have heard me talk about baseball before, I have another show where I talk about a little bit. I haven't done an episode in a while, but my belief about baseball thus far, just to crystallize my perspective and why it's a sort of inside joke here, is this idea that I think that that baseball, minor league baseball, is basically dead. But baseball itself today, you have a fraction of all professional teams that actually play legitimate competitive baseball in this world. It is a small fraction. Minor league baseball is if think about it like this, there's two different types of minor league baseball. You have affiliate baseball, which the teams exist solely for developing players for the major leagues.
Yeah.
And then you have independent baseball, in which the players are paid by the owners of the team, and so they're just completely independent. They're not actually directly linked to any major league team. Well, the problem with affiliate baseball is that the players, because the players are paid for by the major league teams, that means that the major league teams control them as well, which means at any given moment they can be promoted, demoted, traded, or anything. And so 1 week a team can be really good, and then the next week a team can be really bad. And so what it leads to is a situation in which the teams cannot market the wire to wire competitive baseball for like in the major leagues, where you can't say like, oh, I hope my team's good this year. And if you have any hope whatsoever that, you have some great player or great pitchers that come in, but all of a sudden the team is terrible.
And is that AAA?
That's every level. It's every level of affiliate baseball. So if a team is connected to a major league team in any concept, they have that team at any given moment.
It's all wheeling and dealing.
So what it means is these affiliate teams have to figure out, because they can't market competitive baseball.
It's just a bullpen.
Because they can't market competitive baseball, they have to market the gags, giveaways, and gimmicks, as well as the baseball cathedrals in which they play.
Right.
So it's a novelty.
Yeah.
It's a carnival act. It's a carnival act in which it's a baseball themed carnival is what it is. I mean, the players are trying to win, but they can't market competitive baseball. It is not the same. And even the minor league owners themselves will admit that it's not competitive baseball. It's an entertainment diversion. But the interesting thing is that the thing that's so bizarre is that the independent league teams, which are the teams that should be marketing competitive baseball, because they don't owe the major league players anything. They're not getting paid by the major leagues. They should be able to market competitive baseball like it was back in the 1800s or 1900s, where they're like,
and they could actually even say, hey, how about you give us a game and we see how we do.
They could bet a silver trophy full of silver dollars on a game or something, right? And the players all win, and they hype some game up between, the Chicago team versus a Wisconsin team or something like this, where you're having rival cities. But they don't do that. They don't do that.
You got to do it. You got to do it.
No, they market.
You play it in Vegas and do a tray full of silver dollars.
They see the affiliate. Yes, they see the affiliate teams marketing the gags, giveaways, and gimmicks, as well as the cathedrals in which they play. And they say that's the marketing direction that we should go into. But they're operating at a massive disadvantage to the affiliates because they have to pay their players.
Yeah.
Long and short of it, they are not taking advantage of the main marketing avenue of which they have, which is that they're the only ones that can market competitive baseball wire to wire like a major league team can. So as a result, minor league baseball has turned into a gags, gimmicks, and giveaways and carnival act. It's not baseball. It's not the baseball in the old, truest, purest sense of the word. And the same thing with Major League Baseball. Half the teams, the entire mentality of Major League Baseball is, if you think you have a chance at the World Series, then go for it, spend money, get the players you need. But if you don't think you're going to make it to the World Series, then it's better off just selling off all your talent, dumping it all, and starting and having the lowest payroll in the game so that you can, so you're still getting your share of TV revenue and making more money as a losing team than you were even than being mediocre. The worst place to be in Major League Baseball is mediocre. It's either better to be really good or either better or really bad. It's not anything in the middle. And so as a result, half of Major League Baseball makes very little effort to win, if any effort. So let's add it all up then. Let's add it all up. You have affiliate baseball teams, which make up 75% of minor league baseball.
Yeah.
And then you have independent baseball teams make up 25. So with all of them combined, that's 100% that are gags, gimmicks, and giveaways, doing the somersaults on the field and whatever they're doing. So that aren't trying to win. Then you have half of Major League Baseball that aren't trying to win. So what you're dealing with now is that of the 237 odd professional teams in America, you got about 20 that are actually making any effort in which you're trying to win. So the answer to that, so back to that answer to the Savannah Bananas is, where is the winning baseball? Where is the baseball where Ty Cobb once said that Ty Cobb would talk about like crawling through glass to win a baseball game, or Mickey Cochran, who would do anything to win a baseball game? Like I say, baseball has been a reflection of like American culture for the longest time. Like it's sort of like, it's like they say baseball like is America.
That's funny. That's
right?
funny.
It's like reflects America. And so, and all you have to do to see a large swath of America is to look at the game today.
If you look at America now, it's a TikTok culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's a social media. It's a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
And the baseball is mimicking that, or vice versa.
They're doing stunts to try to get a viral video.
Interesting.
It's like, look, if that's what you're into, I guess that's what you're into. But the question I have about if that's what people are into is have you ever really been exposed to the opposite side?
Yeah.
Have you been exposed to baseball in which the game was about the entire season? The game was about it was from wire to wire trying to win. That's why I think the affiliate system was one of the worst things ever happened to baseball. That everybody credits Branch Rickey with this incredible invention of the affiliate system, but it's like he derived an advantage initially, but once everybody else started doing it, there was no more advantage. There's no advantage to anybody in the minor leagues. They all do the same thing.
Well, tell me about Jack, right? Because Jack was one of these Ivory hunters.
He's the long and short of it. Jack's the one that built the minor league system of the Tigers.
Oh, okay.
That's who we're talking about today.
All right. So tell me about Jack.
Yeah. So Jack,
I keep getting you sidetracked.
Well, you know how to trigger me, Jamie.
We're a half hour in. We haven't talked about Jack.
Well, this is a variety show, anyways.
No, dude,
about a variety of topics.
I have not nodded off once.
Good. You're trying to put guardrails on my restrictions to my conversational ability.
Not at all.
Jamie's trying to restrain me.
Not at all. Oh shoot, I didn't upload those pictures. All right, you keep talking. I'll upload pictures.
You blew it. Now we got to start the whole show all over again, Jamie.
Crap.
The whole show.
All right.
Call it off, Jamie. Call it off. We don't have to
wave it off.
The show. Wave it off. All right, folks,
but we're talking about Jack today.
We're not going to start over?
No.
Oh, okay. I can redo everything I just said.
There's no way to do it again.
Oh, you don't want to do it, man?
No way.
All you got to do is mention that Savannah Bananas or some other team, and I'll get right back into it. Just trigger me again, Jamie. I'll be equally triggered with the mention of it. Because I get that all the time. People throw that at me all the time. They go, "Oh, did you see the Savannah Bananas?" I'm like, dude, don't even mention
you're
it to
into
me. No, yeah, they get that all just in a random conversation. Like, you're into baseball, minor league baseball. So I'm like,
how about them Savannah Bananas?
How about them? Like, don't even say it to me. You know?
Don't.
So yes, Jack Zeller is a major. We've talked about a series of major pieces that have built the Tigers so far. Okay. But Jack Zeller is one of these. Again, the Tigers, the way that they divided their territory for like scouting and development was you had your talent, you had your scouts and the people that ran their organization east of the Mississippi. Mm-hmm. So the Mississippi River was the dividing line. And so as east of the Mississippi was all the players and scouts that we talked about thus far. And then west of the Mississippi is who we're dealing with today, which is Jack Zeller, who was in charge of the entire department. We'll talk about some of the scouts and some of the coaches and stuff because there's some big names there. But the main guy that we're talking about today is Jack Zeller, who is just like he's got this great story about like how he got into baseball. He was basically just like overall just a smart and accomplished individual who just like his life route, like he was a minor league baseball player, and his like sort of business pursuits and the avenues in which his life was, moving forward conveyed him into the game. And he was just a talented person that could basically do anything that he put his mind to. And once the like sort of life sort of directed him into baseball, then he stuck with that and became outstanding at working with the Tigers and being a scout and then a scouting director. And then eventually he became really what you could classify as the Tigers' first general manager. You could say, well, technically Mickey Cochran was their first general manager. He was their general manager from 1936 to 1938. Technically he was their first general manager, but the thing is Mickey was also their coach and also their catcher. So in the traditional sense of the word, the Mickey was more of like a manager who decided which players were going to be on his team. Yeah. That was in essence, his role as a GM. God, but in the traditional sense where you've got an executive that's up in the front office, that's behind a desk making calls and doing all that, the traditional way we look at a GM, then Jack Zeller was the first.
Yeah, there's like a bronze trophy of Sylvester Stallone, Rocky Balboa in Philly. There should be a bronze trophy of Mickey.
Oh, 100%.
A bronze statue.
100%.
You know.
Well, they got sculptured at
him.
Comerica Park. They don't even have his number retired there. Why would they build him a bronze statue? His number is.
It should be. He's so important. I mean,
I
to the city. I mean,
100%.
like the Joe Louis Fist. I mean, outside of the ballpark, outside of that, the city should recognize him.
Agreed.
As a just making Detroit the athletic sports machine that it is. Anyway, all right.
Well, the final stamp, besides the huge argument that we've already made, like the entire argument of it, I wanted the final exclamation point to
they
Mickey
got his name on the wall, though.
Is that Mickey Cochran, when he went into the Hall of Fame, he won 2 World Series with the A's. He went to a 3rd World Series with the A's. We went to 3 World Series with the A's. 1, 2, was an MVP with the A's, had a much longer career with the A's, but I think it was 8 years with the A's. He only had, I think, 4 or 5 with the Tigers.
Yeah.
So he played substantially longer and had substantially more accomplishments because he went to 2 World Series with the Tigers and won 1. He did win an MVP with the Tigers, but so he had basically did what he did with Detroit, but just a little bit less than he did with the A's. Yet he went into the Hall of Fame as a Tiger. You're only allowed to wear 1 hat in the Hall of Fame, and he went in wearing a Tiger hat. Nice. So where is the reciprocal respect shown to Mickey Cochran? Doesn't exist. You can say his name is like on like the hallowed name wall, but his number isn't retired. His number isn't retired. Whereas which is like the legendary thing, like nobody's allowed to wear the number again.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, sorry.
So
I digress. You were talking about Mickey, and I think about.
Well, whenever you hear
Mickey,
that, whenever you hear Mickey, it's worth. I give you respect because whenever you hear Mickey's name, it's worth. I mean, that's the revered presence that Mickey deserves. Is that when his name is mentioned, it's worth the pause to put that briefcase in, Jamie. So I respect you for.
But that's why we do the show, because it's part of that underappreciated story that should be appreciated. Anyway,
but it's worth it. But it's worth the aside, and I appreciate you mentioned giving them a little bit of love to Mickey real quick, because we'll give him. We'll talk about him all the time. Yeah. So, anyways, Jack Zeller. Let me just read his little story here, because you're not going to see this anywhere else. I mean, there is Wikipedia articles. There is aspects of his life online. You can see it, but you're not going to hear this. This is only in the book. This is like literally a story. Actually, I take that back. This is an excerpt out of, it's not on the line, but it's an excerpt out of Fred Lieb's book on the Detroit Tigers, which I believe was written in the 1951 or something like that. It was written. So it was like 51. So he's like looking back on Jack Zeller, and anybody that's looking for baseball history, if you're looking for some real baseball history and you're looking for like a concise place to look no further than Fred Lieb. He's got an entire series on all of the major teams. He's got the Phillies, he's got the A's, he's got every like major team, and that guy was there. He knew, he was a sports writer the entire time for the late 1800s, early 1900s, and all of his books are a reflection of his remembrances of the history of. He did the history of each team, and he was a guy that was there. So his book. Like, if you haven't read the Fred Lieb book on the Detroit Tigers and you're a Tiger fan, you're not studying it. Like it is
Get
an
yourself
essential,
down to your public library.
It is an essential component of Detroit Tiger history, is to read Fred Lieb's history of the Detroit Tigers. So that's where this excerpt comes from. And so it shows you a sign of the respect of that, of the importance of Jack Zeller, that Fred Lieb has got an extensive description of his life story. All right. Right. So this is by Fred Lieb.
Tell me about Jackie boy.
So, all right. So bald as Frank Navin, Zeller is taller and chunkier than the former aesthetic looking Tiger owner. In fact, Jack was a pretty husky athlete in his day. His career in organized baseball was as varied as that of Ed Barrow, the early Detroit manager and later Yankee president. Jack has been a pitcher, manager, owner of a minor league club at 25, a lieutenant in World War I, a government auditor, an oil man, scout, minor league chain director, and then head of baseball's biggest moneymaker. Zeller was born in St. Louis, a town long famous for turning out good ball players. His father owned a bookstore there, and as a kid, Jack used to browse through his dad's books and magazines. This early experience in the Zeller bookshop was the foundation for his taste for substantial reading, and there have been few better informed men in baseball than Jack Zeller. So this next chunk, I'm going to save a little bit of time and kind of warp speed through this.
Go.
It's it lists a ton of different teams he played for. In fact, it's a pretty good summary on Wikipedia just to fill this gap, because it's a fairly extensive thing. But I do want to mention his minor league career, his baseball career, but Wikipedia just kind of goes through the dates, because it's like he tells stories about a couple things, which anyways. So it says, here's his playing career. It says, he only began his baseball career in 1901 playing at Forest Park in St. Louis. A pitcher, he joined the semi-pro Trolley League, and then in 1903 was the Missouri Valley League playing for the Joplin Miners in Joplin and Sedalia Gold Bugs in Sedalia. After playing in Colorado, New York in 1905, he moved up to the minor league playing for Haverhill in the New England League. After an arm injury, he was quickly released by the team and went back to New York, where he played first base and managed Bath Beach, an independent team in Brooklyn that played on Sunday. So after 3 years there, he purchased half of the Springfield Ponies in the Connecticut League. So that's where we're going to pick back up because it's like a whole rant. It's like this huge thing. So, but I want to connect that he had this just huge minor league baseball career that he didn't make the majors, but he was just played, he played for years. All right. So to turn back in. So Jack turned east and in 1904 pitched for Providence and Schenectady. He had a wealth of speed and still thinks he might have made his niche as a pitcher if he hadn't ruined his arm early in the season of 1905. Zeller then went into business in New York and kept up the baseball touch by playing first base for the resort team at Bath Beach. We mentioned that in our but the real professional game was in his blood. And in 1908, he purchased half interest in Springfield, Massachusetts club in the New England League. That's where we left off. It made him the youngest club owner in the nation. Later, he was president, secretary, manager, and ticket taker of Pittsfield in the same league. In World War I, he failed to pass his final examinations at the officers' training camp in Fort Benjamin Harrison at Indianapolis, so he earned his shoulder bars the hard way. He enlisted as a buck private in the regular army, and when the war ended, he was a second lieutenant and instructor in musketry and bayonet work at Camp Lee, Virginia. After the war, the young St. Louisan became interested in the oil game of the Southwest, but he still liked to keep that feel for baseball. Paul LeGrave, the business manager of Fort Worth Club, told him, while you're going around signing up oil leases, if you see any players that are worth bringing in, we'd like to know about it. It wasn't long before Jack was a full-time scout. So there it is. That's his thing. He's out doing oil. The guy says, hey, while you're out there, if you see anybody, let me know. Yeah. So he's scouting out ahead before there was even really scouting.
Yeah.
So, and apparently Zeller brought something in that was worthwhile, as Fort Worth had amazing success in the post-war years, winning 7 straight Texas League championships from 1919 to 1926. The Detroit club then had a working agreement with Fort Worth that brought Jack in the early contact with Frank Navin, and Navin liked the way Zeller did business. I like Zeller because he can say no, and no means no, Navin once said. You can find so many yes men in this business. Navin suspected some of his scouts weren't entirely disinterested in their recommendations. He made no direct accusations, but felt several of his men were recommending players, often so-called Humpty Dumptys, and were getting a cut in the purchase money. So in 1926, he reorganized his scout machinery and put Jack Zeller in charge. From there on, Jack's stock rose steadily in the Tigers organization until he ran the whole works for Briggs. He's talking about him becoming a GM for Walter Briggs, who had succeeded Frank Navin when he passed.
Right.
And so, but if you notice right there, Navin was the problem was that what he's saying is that these scouts were getting finder fees for these players they signed.
Right.
So he's sitting there saying they're just after the signing fees, and that they're just signing kind of every old Tom, Dick, and Harry.
This guy is great.
It's exactly.
We should bring him up.
Oh, it's not my fault that he didn't turn out to be crap. The guy just didn't do what he was supposed to do. He was lazy.
He held it back
play.
before.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
He was good when I saw him. Now he stinks.
Hey.
So he's signing a bunch of Humpty Dumptys. So he brings his Jack Zeller.
Have you ever been called a Humpty Dumpty?
Not me, but I called somebody that today.
Did you?
I called 2 people that.
I might have done the Humpty dance.
One person a Humpty and the other person a Dumpty. So anyways, so it was 2 people I called. I broke Humpty Dumpty into 2. So anyways, so that's how he got, that's why he brought him in. He's like, you're not a yes man. You're going to say no, and you're going to basically be my lieutenant, man. You're going to be out there cracking heads if they're not signing the right guys. So this is the final bit of the article. Shrewd, substantial, with a thorough knowledge of all the intricacies of baseball, he proved a valuable right bower for owner Briggs, even though Zeller's manipulation of Tiger material in the minors got him very much into the tousled hair of Judge Landis and cost the Detroit club around 100 ball players. Wow. So what he's talking about here is
he cost them 100 ball players.
Yes.
What do you mean he cost?
There was a couple things back and see when this is another aspect of the evolution of the minor league I don't explain that. I'll explain. So as what was happening is that these teams were signing as these farm teams were being built, right? What these because when a player signed with a team back then, they were owned. Okay,
Sure.
they were like literally friggin' property of the team, right? You
yeah.
ain't you're
No,
signed
they
you
were-
signed your life away, right?
There were people.
Yes, and so what they were doing,
Equated it to.
so what they were doing was
yeah.
like basically hoarding players.
Okay.
And so what they were doing is like they were literally just going out and just signing up like every single guy that could play baseball, like even remotely decent, and then like, hey, well, like just like signing like massive numbers of players.
All right.
And so there was these huge numbers of players that were owned by these teams and protected on their sort of minor league farm, but they were like, there wouldn't even be enough if there's like 50 years of time to play games. None of them would have had been able to all play at the same time.
Right.
They were just like literally just getting their names
what
on
did
contracts.
it mean that he cost them 100 players?
Because they were the way that they were doing it was basically shady. They were just signing up every single guy around and not even by owning their rights.
But how did he cost them?
Because Commissioner Landis, when he found out about how egregious that some of these teams were doing that behavior, that it was like players, that it was leading to players like not even be able to play baseball at all.
Was Frank and the Tigers doing this?
Yes, that's what he's saying.
Okay,
Jack Zeller was one of the main guys doing it.
I got a couple players
Branch
in this
Rickey
coat
was
pocket.
doing it too.
I got a couple players
Branch
in
Rickey
this pocket.
was doing it too.
I got a couple in my suitcase.
Yeah, and it was leading to like players not being able to play at all because there wasn't even enough time in a field or room to let them play. They were just locked up under contract, and they couldn't go to other teams. They were just literally like perpetually under the Tigers' contract.
But I don't understand how that cost them players.
Because they made them forfeit. Basically, they made them release all the guys.
They got spanked for it.
The commissioner, Kennesaw Mount Landis, made him just release like all of their minor league players, like all of them. They let it turn them all into free agents so that they could release, like dumping all their fish back into the ocean. You see what I'm saying? But Branch Rickey, it happened to him too. There was a couple other guys, but Jack Zellers was egregious. So he had to cut him loose.
Jackie.
Yeah.
That innocent looking fella right there.
Yeah, poor nice guy. He didn't do anything wrong. Jack didn't do anything.
All right, so there's that. What was the other image there you sent over?
So I just found this online before I came. I did a quick little Google search. It's a cool little article. You can find it yourself. It's probably easier to read if you look up online
people
yourself.
Are listening to the audio podcast again, YouTube, Facebook, the videos up there. There's cool images.
What's the headline say? The headline says if you just type in, if you Google Jack Zeller, Detroit
climbing
Tigers,
the baseball ladder.
Yeah, I just Googled Jack Zeller, Detroit Tigers, and you'll see this article. You can read it. I can summarize it pretty quickly.
In American Boy magazine.
It's got a cool picture of Jack Zeller in there, but but what he says is. And see, here's the thing: is I'm going to kind of have to disagree with Jack Zeller a little bit on this because he's subscribed to like the Branch Rickey mentality for identifying talent, and what their main emphasis back then was that what he says in this article to sort of summarize is basically what they're looking for is just pure athletic ability, and they're looking for body style too. So he's talking about like, well, the first thing I look for is like thick legs because it's a long season. A guy with like thick legs can survive a long major league grueling season. Right. He's like, and then also I'm looking for a guy who can throw the ball from really far, like a guy that can throw hard and throw far because you can't really teach velocity. So those are the two things that he's like saying in this article. And they're like, well, what about hitting? And he's like, nah, we'll teach him that.
See, pish posh.
But that's where I disagree. I agree and disagree with Jack Zeller because I believe that the legs are one of the most important aspects, especially for a pitcher. A pitcher's legs are probably the most important part of his body. It's not even his arm, it's his legs. And so I agree with him in that aspect.
Climbing the baseball ladder, and then the deck, the second headline says Jack Zeller, Tiger Scout, tells what it takes, what makes a major leaguer.
So he's talking about what he looks for. That's what's kind of interesting about this article. Is he's saying, all right, he's talking about what he looks for in players.
Sure.
And granted, Jack Zeller,
that's helpful for youngers.
Yeah. So Jack
youngins coming on.
And he talks about he's like if you're at a sandlot somewhere, there's probably somebody in the stands sniffing around looking at the talent. He's like, you're probably getting watched right now. He's like, what we're looking for is guys who can throw and guys who have basically muscular athletic legs because they can handle a long pounding season. That's like his thesis. And I'm like, well, I get the thing about the legs is for a pitcher, that's, in my opinion, the most important part of a pitcher's body is his legs. That's literally the most important thing.
My advice is lay off the dames, Rock.
Yeah.
They weaken the legs.
Yes, exactly.
Lay off the dames, Rock.
Mickey knew.
Lay off the
Mickey knew.
Sorry.
Mickey absolutely knew in Rocky. He knew exactly what he was talking about. There was in recent years, there was just to give an example about how that might seem simple, like, oh, the legs, just okay, yeah, right, the legs. But here's the thing: is that the Tigers had a guy named Michael Fulmer. Okay. Detroit Tigers had a guy named Michael Fulmer who was, I think he was Rookie of the Year or something thereabouts. He was like one of the best pitchers in baseball, like first couple of years of his career. Everybody thought he was like the next Tigers ace.
Yeah.
And so
I remember the name.
Yeah, Michael Fulmer was like the stud. And then he had a knee injury, right? He had a knee injury, something wrong with his knee. And then I remember there's a friend of mine. I have saved the text message because I saw a picture of him in spring training. He's coming off a knee injury. He's in a knee brace. Okay, he's in a knee brace, and the Tigers are letting him pitch in spring training with a friggin' knee brace on. And so I'm sitting there, I'm texting my friend, going,
"He's cooked.
He's cooked. He's cooked. He's in trouble.
Put a fork in him.
Put a fork in him. He's got a knee brace on while he's pitching. Is for his legs the most important part of a pitcher's body.
Next,
and yeah, he blew. I think he had UCL. He had the Tommy John surgery. He blew out his elbow. Right, like a week after that, I saved the text. I'm like, I told you. I called it. The guy's wearing a knee brace in the newspaper photo. I'm going, he's done. He's done. And that's what I mean. They don't. That's what I mean. Like that's basic baseball. Like they have all these biometric studies and all this. Yeah. And they're like, I'm watching it, looking at a guy in a newspaper article wearing a leg brace pitch and going, like, he's done. What are you doing?
He's done.
Because it forces these players to compensate with other muscles that are not used to being at work. And that's what gets destroyed, especially when you're going full velocity, high torque with every muscle in your body trying to sync up with what you've been doing the same for. Like all of a sudden now you have a totally different muscle use in your body for throwing a 90-something mile an hour fastball. It's like, what are they thinking? So anyways, I agree with Jack Zeller in this article about that, pitchers, that looking for a guy, like legs are important or whatever, but I don't agree. But I don't agree that hitting is not the most important thing, because there, like I say, my thesis is the ability to produce runs and create runs with a baseball bat in your hand is the most fundamental aspect of all baseball. And so like even pitching, like if you have a lineup of players that are consistently just smoking baseballs and driving in runs, your pitching can be mediocre and don't have to even be good at all. So anyways, I disagree with that, but then again, I might be wrong because Jack Zeller helped build the 1935 Tigers. Yeah. And he also helped, he also was the Tiger GM when they, he was his career span from 1938 to 45, which means that the 1940 Tigers that won the American League Championship, went to the World Series in 1940. They lost against the Reds. He was the guy that built that team. All right. And then 1945, his final year with the Tigers, they won the World Series against the Chicago Cubs, and he was the GM. That was his last year as a GM. So he built that team too. So then again, like either he changed his mind after this article, which came out in 1940, I think. Yeah. But what did I get the date on that? American Boys.
Jackie Boy.
1938 is when he put that out. So I don't know. But that's the thing is that's what he's suggesting in this is right in line with like what Branch Rickey was preaching, because they would bring all these, and that's how they sign all these players, because if it was like, oh, he's got thick legs and he's got a good arm, sign him up. That's how they did it. And so they're like, it was easy to evaluate those two skills, because you're like, oh, he can run fast. Oh, he's got thick legs, he's got a muscular build, and he can throw the ball a far distance. And so that's like, sign them up, like that's what they were looking for. And then they're like, well, we can teach them how to hit. That was their mentality. So and if everybody's thinking that way, then somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. They're all thinking with the same mindset. So somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose, even if it's wrong. All right,
that's awesome, man. That was good stuff.
So that's Jack. Yeah. So he lost. So he had some good moments and bad moments, but he was the guy that. But he accepted it too. When Landis made him cut all those players, he was like, I deserved it. I deserved it. He handled it with dignity, and he's like, let's turn the page.
Moving along.
Let's turn the page. Like that was a long time ago. That was like last year, Jack, and he's like, long time ago.
Long time.
The ancient history. So,
all right, cool. So I didn't say it up at the top of the podcast, but I think I will say it now. I'm Jamie Flanagan.
Charles Avison.
Like, subscribe, leave a comment, do all those podcast things and all the podcast places. No, seriously, thanks for joining the party. And I always forget to do that up top. You know, it's
well,
like
it means we have to restart the whole show again.
we get into it, and it's like,
We have to
oh, I'm going to
restart the
jump
entire
in,
show.
and yeah, I think we could do it.
Let's restart.
If it wasn't like 1 a.m. already,
Is it really?
we'd do it.
I got
no,
out late.
It's not. I know it's
We're
not.
getting
It's
out
not
late.
quite that late. It will be before we're done kibitzing and
Yeah, well, I know. I'll probably have one more before we go.
For the road, yeah. But no, so thanks for listening. We do this on a relatively regular basis and putting them out, sharing the story. A whole lot more about the City of Champions. Celebrate Champions Day, celebrating Detroit. We do it 24/7, 365 days a year. We're always right here for you. Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah, if anybody ever has any questions
website.
too, if anybody's ever got any questions and wants to talk about something that maybe you had a question about something you saw or whatever, throw it in there and we can talk about something.
Yeah, I love when like it's great when like family members comment and stuff.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. So anyway, thanks for joining the party. Again, like, subscribe, all the podcast things, all the podcast places. We appreciate it. And is that it? We good? You got anything else?
I got a lot more. You want to keep going?
No.
Is that a rhetorical question?
I'm done.
Okay.
I'm done. I'm cooked. We're at an hour. It's like, you've stayed your hour. Go.
Go home.
All right. Be well. Detroit, City of Champions podcast.